North Korea's missile launch yesterday went further than any previous missile launch fired by Kim Jong-un's regime. Experts say the missile's range suggests North Korea now has the capacity to strike our island of Guam, which is, by the way, which was threatened last time I had a chance to fill in for Tucker on the show. For a reaction to the missile launch, we're now joined by a man who knows and understands the threat of North Korea. He is Harry Kassianis, Director of Defense Studies at the Center for National Interest. Harry, how worried should American interests be in the region? How worried should South Korea and Japan be?
Brian, this is the greatest threat of our lifetime. This is the #1 national security threat that the American people should be focused on. Now, you mentioned just a minute ago that this missile proves that the North Koreans are able to hit Guam. I would actually argue that the North Koreans are able to hit pretty much any U.S. base in Asia, South Korea, Japan, and more than likely the U.S. homeland in a very crude capability. We have to keep in mind those last 2 ICBM tests they did in the summer proved that they have the range to hit the United States. Now, we're a little weary in terms of knowing if the telemetry works, if the guidance works, if the heat shield that would actually bring down the warhead on a city all works. But if you put together all the different news reports, it looks like they're pretty close in getting there. So we have to watch this very carefully, and the president needs to respond with the toughest sanctions possible. I know right now we're looking at a lot of sanctions and some restrictions, but clearly not enough to get their attention. I want to bring you to what General McMaster said, National Security Advisor to President Trump today, when asked about military options. Listen.
We ought to make clear what's different about this approach is that we're out of time, right? As Ambassador Haley said before, we've been kicking the can down the road and we're out of road. And so for those who have said and have been commenting about the lack of a military option, there is a military option.
Do you agree?
Well, Brian, yes. What he said is true. We absolutely do have military options. The United States has a military that has a $600 billion annual budget. The North Korean economy as a whole is only worth $14 billion. So in terms of size, scale, capabilities, we can turn North Korea basically into a parking lot if we wanted to. Here's the problem. All the bombs in the world are not going to solve the North Korean dilemma. If we were to go in with a massive military strike, which would be the absolute last option and would probably be in terms of retaliation if they struck one of us or our allies first, we would be talking about a war that would probably involve nuclear weapons. Keep in mind, we think the North Koreans have as many as 60 nuclear weapons.
And Harry, real quick, I get it. What about taking it out on the tarmac? What about knocking it out of the air? What about that?
The challenge is the North Koreans will likely respond. I'd argue that our best strategy, Brian, is old-fashioned containment. If it worked for Ronald Reagan, if it worked for so many different presidents to contain the Soviet Union, which was a much bigger military power and threat, that's the way to go here. We can do that.
We can't, because we're not controlling any of their exporting over to other renegade nations like Syria and like Iran. So I'm not convinced we can. They're a smuggling organization who happens to be masking themselves as a country. Harry, thanks so much for your expertise.
Thanks, Brian.